I want to dip my toes back into the pool of loyalist Space Marine chapters to look at a cute little chapter that I can't believe I don't play because they fit my playstyle so perfectly. Or they fit my dice rolling rather, because I tend to roll really poorly, and that is perfect for the Lamenters chapter, the most unlucky of Space Marines to ever come out of the 21st founding, or maybe ever. Now typically to try out a flavor of Space Marines, I would paint up one intercessor, but I have a box of Terminators. So I'm gonna try a Lamenters Terminator. The new and improved Terminator kit might just be the best box of Warhammer ever. I absolutely love it, and looking through the instructions for which Marine I want to build, I'm thinking the heavy weapon guy. One tricky spot I found on the Terminators are these little cameras that are really fragile. I like to nip the sprue nibs off the bottom first to take any tension off of this bit so I can clip it safely. I cleaned up the rest of the parts, and another sticky spot is on either side of the Terminator's torso. Something about the plastic molding gives these spots an unsightly seam, which needs a few wipes of a nail file to smooth out. I glued together my Marine, and I like to keep Terminators simple. The silhouette is beautiful, and the only embellishment I gave my Lamentor is a little veteran honor badge hanging off his belt. Now for the arms. Terminators use good old-fashioned power fists, one of the most devastating weapons in the Space Marine arsenal. This worked for his left arm, and for his right arm, as much as I love the Stormbolter, 4 shots of strength 4, I actually want to try a weapon I've never built before, the Heavy Flamer. This monstrous weapon is extra brutal, a typically vehicle-mounted flamethrower that you don't have to be too accurate for, which is just the thing for the historically unlucky Lamentor Space Marines. To get the arms in the exact pose I want, I use my Dremel tool to carve away the arms on an angle, and then to make them even more extreme, I mixed up some green stuff and made little pucks on this fella's armpits. I used my hobby knife to cut these down on an angle, and then glued on the arms so he is leaning into the torrent of flame coming out of his giant flamethrower. Now for shoulder pads. I glue these on a little bit tall. Terminator arms can look a little wonky if the shoulder pads are too snug. I glue these on so they match in height, and for the helmet, the sprue actually gives quite a few extra helmets, so I can use some of the already primed and base-coated helmets from the last time I painted Terminators. Now, the secret sauce that makes a human into a Space Marine is the gene seed, and all Space Marines produce gene seed. It's collected by the apothecaries when a Space Marine freshly dies, and that gene seed is kept by the chapter to produce more battle brothers, but a portion of it is sent back to the Imperium as a tithe. And why does the Imperium need gene seed? Well, I'm glad you asked. When the need is great, they produce brand new chapters of Space Marines. And the 21st time they decided to do this, the Adeptus Mechanicus was like, well, as long as we're making Space Marines, let's try some things out. Now, the problem with creating Space Marines is that there's genetic flaws within the gene seed. Each specific chapter of Space Marines has their own unique flaw. The Blood Angels have the Black Rage, which will eventually turn them from a battle brother into an uncontrollable rage monster, which sounds great, but they can't follow orders very well, so that's a problem. The Ultramarines' genetic flaw is that it makes them really boring, so the Tep Addicts of Mars decided that they were going to try to fix these gene flaws. Now, fixing these flaws seems like an obvious slam dunk, but diverting from the Emperor's holy vision didn't really work out. Most of the Space Marines that were created during the 21st founding either were horribly mutated, turned traitor, or just were overall bad. They didn't come out of the oven right. The exception was the Lamenters. They were absolutely perfect. In fact, they were better than perfect, they were upgraded. They no longer had the gene flaws of the Blood Angels. They were a perfect Space Marine Legion. But once they left into the galaxy on their crusading fleets, things started to go downhill. For no particular reason other than they're just literally cursed with misfortune. Nothing has ever gone right for them. They have been nearly wiped out multiple times. No Space Marines really like them. The one time they were buddies with another Space Marine chapter, those Space Marines ended up turning traitor and kind of dragging the Lamentors down with them. They were eventually forgiven by the Imperium, but yeah, it's a bad time being a Lamentor. And speaking of time, it's time to give my Lamentor a base. And I'm gonna be using some Eons of Battle bits from EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch, like the Nick and Jay dice. I rolled a 3, and it is the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members get 1 credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. This April, we're going hard into skirmish fantasy warfare with 3 themes. The Mythical Forest, a set of fantastical trees held aloft by otherworldly levitating stones and waterfalls with the power of life. The Eternal Graveyard, a desolate shrine to the forces of death, macabre headstones piled against the last remnants of a long-forgotten cemetery. And the Cannibal Camp, a ramshackle encampment where the marauders can divide up their spoils and cook up their victims. These sets are designed with storytelling in mind and are the right size and shape for all the popular fantasy games. You can match the theme of your army, keeping your beloved collection looking good while dominating the battlefield. These sets are available on our website as STLs, and don't worry if you don't have a 3D printer, they are available physically, printed for you. To build the base, I looked through the Bricks and Stones pack to find the bits that would fill up a 40mm Terminator base. And to set down a base layer, I glued down some 1/8" cork and started layering on some rubble. I did 2 big patches and then grabbed some scale bricks I had and scattered these over the spots of cork peeking through. Now to get my Marine situated. I put green stuff under his feet so I can squish him down onto the base and have the green stuff get into all the nooks and crannies, giving my Marine a nice solid connection. Now that I know where my Marine's feet stand, I put on a few more bricks and then sprinkled on some sand using a brush to sculpt the sand into all the cracks and crevices, and I locked it all in place with some ultra thin super glue. The base is looking spiffy, now it's time for some paint. I blasted the Mini with a black prime and then hit him from above with a white zenithal. Now the Lamenters wear yellow armor, but first I put some magenta into my airbrush and sprayed this on as some shadows, getting this in between his legs, under his arms and armpits, and under his chest. This is in preparation for the yellow. I used Imperial Fist contrast paint. This is a transparent color that looks brilliant over white, and over magenta it changes into a saturated orangey brown. I put some black speed paint over his left shoulder, and I feel like this model could use some more saturated shadows, so I broke out the Fugue in orange. I glazed this into the recesses. If the base color is going to be yellow, I want it to be as bright and as saturated as possible. I took some warm white onto a sponge and started sponging this over the entire Mini, doing some weathering and paint chips. And to take this weathering to the next level, I used a brush loaded up with some paint and connected some of the sponging chips to make these bigger. Then I came back in with a dark brown and I filled in the biggest paint chips so that it looked like the paint had been worn down to the bare ceramite underneath. After that, I grabbed some white paint and threw this over the Imperialis on his chest, on his little decorations, and on his right shoulder pad. Once these were dry, I hit them with some Nuln Oil, and while I was waiting for the Nuln Oil to dry, I hit the Purity Seal, using up the browns I already had on the wet palette. I came back in with the white paint and threw a few highlights over the white decorations. Ooh, my little Terminator is looking like he is fresh from a fight with the Tyranids right after the Bad Ab War. Oh, if I was playing the Lamenters on the tabletop. It feels like I play the Lamenters on the tabletop every single time I play my Space Marines, because boy, do I roll a lot of ones. But if I was writing an army list specifically about the Lamenters, I would pick First Company Task Force, give myself a handicap, because that's probably the worst Space Marine detachment, and then every single time I lose, I could just say that that is the fluffiest game I have ever had. Now, First Company Task Force is undisputably the worst Space Marine detachment, but I think there is still plenty of fun to be had. And it makes a lot of sense for the Lamenters, because the Lamenters are very often not at chapter strength, usually at a few hundred battle brothers. So I think it makes a lot of sense to pick a detachment where you can do a lot with just a little bit. This is a detachment built all around the chapter veterans. You got your Blade Guard veteran, Stern Guard veteran, Vanguard veteran, Terminators. Confusingly not Heroes of the Chapter, because that unit didn't exist when they wrote this detachment and Games Workshop refuses to update First Company Task Force, but it's still pretty fun. In this detachment, you get super Oath of Moments, so you pick an enemy unit at the start of your command phase and you get reroll hit rolls, reroll wound rolls, and +1 to wound, so that one enemy unit is going to get absolutely decked every single turn. And some of the stratagems are really spicy, particularly the ones based around the Terminators. Orbital Teleportarium. This stratagem gives your Terminators uppy downy. You got a big 10 brick of Terminators, probably with attached Librarian, so you can have the sustained hits 1 on your 40 Stormbolter shots. You shoot all your shots at the end of your opponent's turn, you suck them off the board, and then in your turn, you deep strike them back down on the board to shoot their 40 Stormbolters again. Stormbolters are nothing to write home about, but when you shoot 40 of them, with the, Cyclone missile launchers and a couple of little shots from your Librarian too, it gets pretty spicy. And again, if you're bringing nothing but veteran Space Marines, the Terminators actually become the guys who are killing your opponent's troopers. And speaking of Terminators being awesome, in this detachment, there is an enhancement, Iron Resolve, specifically for Terminator characters that grants them a 5-up feel no pain, but once per battle, they can give it to the squad. So then you've got Terminators with a 5-up feel no pain. And as if that wasn't gross enough, you can tack on a stratagem, Legendary Fortitude, for -1 to oncoming damage. So you can turn a squad of Terminators indestructible, at least once per battle. That is very Lamentersy. They always fight to the last. And it's always to the last. They always die, but it's gonna be glorious. And speaking of glorious, their chapter symbol is legendary, and legendarily hard to paint. The Lamenters wear a shoulder pad of black and white checkerboards with a circle in the middle containing a bleeding heart. To start out, I tried to paint some grids, doing some fine lines of black, first vertically and then horizontally. This basically gave me my checkers, and I filled in half of these with black paint, doing a few coats to get full coverage. Now his shoulder pad is really round, so I had to do some wonkiness to get the squares on the edges to look right. And I went back and forth over and over with white and black paint, fixing up the edges of the squares. Once I had the checkerboards right, I covered up a third of them with a big white circle. I outlined the circle with black paint, and then I did about 10 coats of white to make the inside nice and vibrant. Then I painted the heart. This worked, but I didn't quite get it in the dead center. I decided I didn't need to fix this, it was fine, especially with the blood drip added on. And while I had the red out, I hit the purity seals and his lenses. With the freehanding done, which took longer than everything else on the mini, it was looking crispy but a little bit flat. I thinned down some black contrast paint and did a few layers over everything, forcing in some shadows to his shoulder, and I did a little bit of sponging for some paint chips. Now he's looking spiffy, but a little bit empty, he has no head. I grabbed my Terminator heads and painted these on the sprue, hitting the gas mask with some black speed paint, picking out the eyes with red, and using the thinned down black speed paint to shade the recess of his helmet, doing a few final edge highlights of white. I glued the head into place with plastic glue and he was nearly complete. One of the fun things of the Terminators are the special weapons they're allowed to carry. Space Marines can usually carry plasma guns or flamethrowers, but Terminators can carry vehicle weapons. The Heavy Flamer is probably the worst of the three right now. Strength 5, AP-1, damage 1, D6 number of attacks, and this guy is a Lamentor, so it's almost certainly going to be a 1 number of attacks. The Assault Cannon is a little bit interesting. It's better than the Stormbolter, 6 attacks of Strength 6, AP 0, damage 1. It's okay. The best weapon right now is the Cyclone Missile Launcher. It has 2 firing profiles. The frag profile is 2 D6 bolter shots, which is lovely to tack on to the 40 Stormbolter shots that the squad is already doing. The other profile is the crack profile. That one is kind of 2 wimpy las cannon shots that every single time I have ever fired them have always missed, but it's fun that you get to fire them. This guy has got the flamethrower, and it is time to paint up the flamethrower. With this big ol' weapon, I want to give it a bruised gunmetal appearance. I grabbed some white paint and did some stippling and dry brushing on the top half of the gun, making a gradient from the dingy zenithal up to scratchy pure white, and now I can lay down some black. I thinned down black contrast paint and glazed this over the gun, letting it pool in the bottom and be thinned out at the top. I did a little more dry brushing of white to hit the edges, and then I did just a little bit of sponging of light gray to get some weathering and battle damage. Now for that base. I want a nice dusty rubble. I started out giving the base a gray base coat and then hit it with some sponging of a mid-tone gray. This hit on all the raised rubble and the sand, and then I did another layer of sponging with a slightly brighter gray. Then I hit the base rim with a coat of gloss black paint, and my little Lamentor was ready to die gloriously defending the Imperium. Imperial Fists, Sides of the Emperor, Salamanders and Rogue Trader, Lamenters. Space Marines look so good in yellow. I don't get to paint a lot of Space Marines in really bright colors because I'm a Black Templar player, and there's a joy in painting black power armor, but man, do Space Marines pop in bright colors. And it makes no sense. These guys are warriors. Why would they paint themselves in colors that you could never possibly be camouflaged or gain the benefit of cover if you are bright poppy yellow? But man, does it look good on the tabletop. The Lamentors are the unluckiest of the Space Marine chapters, but that has made them a fan favorite Space Marine chapter. And I'm gonna play that first company task force. I only have this one Lamentor, so I'll be using my Black Templars, but I will be playing with the Lamentors in mind. And I'm sure my dice will roll poorly enough that it'll be a very Lamentors themed game. Don't forget about the Eons of Battle basing bits available at eonsofbattle.com, and let me know in the comments below what Space Marine chapter, loyalist or traitor, should I look at next.